Okay. All right, everyone. Good afternoon, and greetings to you all. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where people are right now. I am Sharon McKinley, and I'm the Senior Consultant with the NRC for In-Home Services, which is funded by the Department of Health and Human Services Children's Bureau. So on behalf of the NRC for In-Home Services, I would like to welcome you to the Promoting Safe and Stable Families Peer Learning Call today. Today's topic is on community-based family support services as it relates to promoting safe and stable families in your community. So before we get started, and this is official, even though we've already had a conversation going here, could we say who's on the phone and what state you're calling from? And we can start, I guess, from east to west. Okay.
Guy Thompson, Michigan.
Carolyn Regula, Iowa.
Well, I guess I should probably weigh in. This is Brian Cummings from Massachusetts.
And Kim Bishop Stevens from Massachusetts.
And Deborah Berkovitz from Massachusetts.
Mississippi.
This is Carolyn Bland from Mississippi.
Keisha Darby from Mississippi.
Thank you all for joining us on the call today and taking time out of your August summer month to have a peer-to-peer call. Before I introduce our presenters, just so that in case something happens, if you all could mute your phone so that we won't hear any background noises while they're doing their presentation, and you do that by hitting star 6. And then once they finish their presentation, then I will open it up for group discussion, okay? Thank you. I will be sending out the material, the PowerPoint presentation, once this is over, and it will also be posted on the NRC In-Home Services website. So today, starting out, we have, to start off our interactive conversation, we have Brian Cummings. He is the Director of the Community Development at the Massachusetts Department of Children and Family Services Central Office in Boston. He oversees the federal Promoting Safe and Stable Families program that supports community partnerships work at the DCF, including Community Connection Coalitions, Family Advocates, and Family Nurturing Programs. Brian also leads a team of regionally based community organizers who provide technical assistance and program expertise to these innovative community-based initiatives. Brian has over 25 years of clinical and program experience in child welfare at the local, regional, and state level. He holds a MSW from the University of Connecticut in social work. And then we also have Deborah Berkovitz. Okay. She is with the Massachusetts Department of Public Health and was formerly the Director of FRESH, which stands for Family Recovery Engagement Support of Hampton County, which is, of course, in western Massachusetts. Fresh Start is a collaboration of Massachusetts Department of Health, Public Health, and Children and Families. They work with pregnant women and new parents who are affected by substance use disorders and their children. It is a home-based family support service engagement project, primarily staffed by peer workers. She is currently a trainer for the Massachusetts Home Visiting Initiative, and she also has prior work with the Maryland Department of Public Health, where she evaluated local and national projects as a contract researcher. Kim Bishop Stevens, who is also on the panel, is the manager of Substance Abuse for Massachusetts Department of Children and Families. She's responsible for development of policies and best practice and grants related to substance abuse in the child welfare system. Kim also serves as DCF's primary liaison for substance use interagency initiative with sister state agencies. And then in 2003, she was named Robert Wood Johnson's Developing Leadership and Reducing Substance Abuse Fellow. So I'm going to turn this now over to Massachusetts, and I think, Brian, you're going to start us off. Oh, before we get started, did someone just join us?
Yes, this is Johanna Hatcher from Florida.
Excellent.
Johanna, thank you for joining us today. Okay, Brian, I'm turning it over to you now.
Oh, thanks, Sharon. All right, so first of all, folks, I wanted to give you a little bit of background about our system. After working with many of you for many years, it's become very apparent to us in Massachusetts that every state's unique, and we're certainly unique among ourselves. Massachusetts is a state-owned and operated child welfare system, and by that I mean we are state-administered as well as state-staffed. We don't have deployment of our resources through local government entities. It's all through state employees and or through contracted services. That's something to kind of keep in mind. We have 29 catchment areas. They don't follow any kind of standard other political delineation, and that falls within kind of these 4 large regional buckets. And I think, as many of you know, over the last few years, we've had some pretty significant economic retrenchment, and we've seen really an upsizing in terms of our oversight of programs. So where we used to have 29 area directors overseeing our clinical work in these 29 catchment areas, they now basically have responsibility for 2 catchment areas. So they've really kind of mushroomed up, and that's been all the way up through the system. Sharon, if you could maybe go to the next slide. Today we're going to be talking about one particular area around a number of our community-based prevention and family support programs. Since the Promoting Safe and Stable Families program came about, the old Family Preservation and Support Services Initiative, Massachusetts has been basically operating with a waiver. Originally, we had 2 categories of programs. As you know, we now have 4. We've been operating well beyond the 20% categorical requirements of the program, mostly because even back in 1995, we really felt like statewide that we just didn't have a lot of investment in prevention from the child welfare standpoint. Our services were very much reactionary, certainly incident-driven. We felt like we could do a much better job of trying to get out well ahead of situations developing to come to the attention of the child welfare system. So what we basically did is we took, at that time, a little over half of our family pres dollars and invested in a building of some community infrastructure in some of our highest need communities. When we were on the pre-call, we had some reference to core cities out in Michigan. We have a similar term called gateway communities in Massachusetts. And these are communities that are really kind of the first tier that really started suffering a whole range of social ills. A lot of it really attributed to a change in economics in the economies, from the late 50s into the 1960s and still to the present to some degree. And that includes our largest city, Boston, which is the capital, and then a number of smaller communities. Worcester, which is the 2nd largest community in the state, Springfield, which is the 3rd, and then subsequent smaller communities of the 40,000, 50,000 range. One of the communities we'll be talking about in a few minutes will be Springfield, which, as you saw from the previous slide, is located about 2/3 of the way across the state. There it is. Look at that, modern technology. So we're
Brian, you have to tell me to advance to the next one because I don't know where you are, okay?
okay.
Okay.
I jumped ahead.
Okay.
So as you can see, on the far right-hand side of the state is Boston, which is the state capital. We're located on the Atlantic Ocean. And then out in Hampden County, which is across the state in that big green area, is the city of Springfield and Holyoke. Springfield and Holyoke are two of our gateway communities. So we'll be discussing those in a few minutes. Okay, you can go back now, Sharon, to slide 4. Thank you. So as you can see, Massachusetts is a fairly densely populated state, relatively small in area, and that the population of Hampden County is just under 500,000 people, which is about 7% or so of the state total. Back in 2011, when we started having discussions, about 100,000 folks, give or take, have been admitted to licensed substance abuse treatment services in the state, which was about 1.5% of the population. And as you can see, the last number, about 9,000 of those people were from Hampden County, which is 9% of the state total. So the numbers, there's some disproportionality here, which I think gives you some sense of what the possible need was. As I was saying a few minutes ago, Massachusetts has invested most of its dollars into prevention services, and we've done that through community connections coalitions, which are local collaboratives consisting of human services providers, local government, what we refer to as the usual suspects, schools, law enforcement, and probably most significantly parents. One of the things that we realized early on were that there wasn't a place at most discussion tables for families. We had heard from families pretty early on in our planning process back in '94 that families really did feel like they had a voice in terms of how services were constructed. So we really felt like we needed to do something to kind of turn the system on end, and we really brought out this community connections model, if you will, of doing planning and coordinating. Many of the things that we've done since then have come from our community connections experience. Kim will be discussing one of the projects that we did in another part of the state, which was a precursor to the Fresh Start and family recovery programs in Western Mass. So they've been these incubators for innovation, if you will, give us a chance to kind of try out some new ideas and see whether or not they actually had any potential of gaining some traction. So I'm just about ready to turn over to Kim. Kim is our manager of substance abuse services. She kind of leads the charge, if you will. And Kim?
Thanks, Brian. Before I go into the regional partnership grants, I'm going to just follow up a little bit with what Brian was talking about, because we had two things that happened in the state prior to receiving one of the regional partnership grants. And one was in 2004 and 2005, Massachusetts received a technical assistance grant from the National Center on Substance Abuse and Child Welfare, as have many other states across the country, to look at how the systems of child welfare and substance abuse disorder treatment work together. We looked at cross-systems communication, treatment models, and cross-systems training, and that really helped form some interagency groups that really kind of were able to move these grants forward and to look at kind of projects to think about how to better serve families with substance use disorders who are involved in the child welfare system. What Brian was also mentioning is with some Promoting Safe and Stable Family dollars in about 2004, we actually started an engagement service project in the northeast part of Massachusetts and that was really to look at families who are not in substance use treatment in the community. They were having a hard time getting them to treatment, and using those dollars to really have someone engage with them and help them connect to community-based treatment services. So that project, which actually still exists today, is a funded service through the Department of Children and Families, was what we really used to apply for the regional partnership grants. Some of you may be familiar with the Regional Partnership Grant Program. It came out of the Promoting Safe and Stable Family Program in 2006. The first round of these grants was awarded in 2007. It's administered by the Children's Bureau out of the Administration for Children and Families, and it was really it was recognizing that parental substance abuse was such a key factor underlying many family involvement in the child welfare system. Originally, these grants were targeted for methamphetamine and other substance use. I think that has been expanded, but if you recall back in 2007, methamphetamine use and abuse across the country was something that child welfare agencies were really grappling with. So in the first round in 2007, there was 53 initial grantees that were awarded grants to look at a variety of ways to better serve families with substance use disorders in the child welfare system. So we all were kind of doing something a little bit differently from each other. There was a national evaluation, and technical assistance was provided by the National Center on Substance Abuse and Child Welfare. Those, some of us had 3-year grants, but many others had 5-year grants. Massachusetts did have a 5-year grant that we put out in Hampden County. Since then, those grants kind of sunsetted last year, and there was a second round of regional partnership grants that were awarded last year. 17 grants were awarded. Massachusetts was lucky enough to receive one of those as well, which we put in the southeast part of our state, again, looking at better treatment models and community work to better serve families. And there was also 8 2-year extensions. So our Family Recovery Project, which I'm going to talk more in depth about in a minute, was one of the programs that was awarded a 2-year extension. So at this point, Massachusetts has had 6 years in Hampden County of this treatment service as well as community work, and we have 1 year in the southeast with these grants. This round 2, the other thing that's kind of different about the new grant is there's a much more focus on child well-being and services to all family members, not just parental substance abuse, and a much stronger cross-site evaluation to really see how we are making changes, hopefully for the better, for these families and what treatment models really work. Can you forward to the next slide, please? So the Family Recovery Project, which we have out in Hampden County and have had there for 6 years and have started a Family Recovery Project in our southeast, really is to serve families involved with the Department of Children and Families who have lost custody of their children or who are at imminent risk of losing custody due to their parental substance use disorder. So these are families who are also not engaged in traditional community-based services, because we did find that a lot of our families find it very difficult for a variety of reasons to engage in community-based services. So this is really an engagement model that's very community-based. We have our family recovery specialists, which are master's level clinicians that are assigned to the family that go in, provide home-based work, ongoing treatment to multiple family members that's trauma-informed with the goal of connecting them to community-based services. So that's the long-term goal. During our first regional partnership grant out in Hampden County, we actually were serving families up to a year, and originally it was actually up to 18 months. Due to sustainability issues in this current extension and with the new 5-year grant, we're talking about serving families 6 to 8 months. But many of these families are struggling with multiple issues. There's lots of trauma, dual diagnosis, a lot of challenges going on. That one of the feedback that we did get from the families is they really like the fact that they could work with a program for so long and really could work with these clinicians and really get to know them. And so we're kind of evaluating what the changes we are going to see when we drop down to a more sustainable time period of 6 months. But it is providing treatment services as well as case management and outreach, again, with making sure that we're making the connection to more community-based services and getting these families the support they need within the community. Next slide, please. And finally, I want to talk a little bit about, we have this treatment model that we're evaluating and looking at to see kind of the outcomes for families. And along with that, we recognize, and this is why the National Center actually exists on substance abuse and child welfare, that substance abuse treatment providers and child welfare have not always worked hand in hand, and there's been some challenges and between these systems across the country, and you're probably familiar with them in your own state, of really working closely together and having a combined family recovery vision for families and really understanding what that means both from the child welfare perspective and from the substance abuse perspective. So another piece of our grant that we have out in Hampden County, and I've started it in the Southeast, is to look at a family recovery council, which is bringing together treatment and community service providers that serve families in a variety of ways. So we have substance use treatment providers at the table. We have child welfare providers, and as well as the DCF area office representatives at the table, domestic violence, early intervention, the court system, which we've struggled to get to the table a little bit, but we're looking to engage them, our local sheriff's office, mental health providers, housing providers, which has proven to be a real challenge for many of our families, and a variety of other service providers that are really looking to look at cross-systems communication and collaboration and remove barriers to treatment services for families, and again, have this shared vision for our families of what family recovery is all about. So I think that has been extremely successful with a lot of cross-training initiatives. We have a communication committee that looks at how to best streamline referrals into treatment and make sure that child welfare families are getting access to treatment and that there's communication related to that. We have a cross-training committee that's done a great job of putting together a lot of training opportunities at the local level, so there's a better understanding of the systems and we can improve the working relationship. The Public Relations Committee has looked at, we have brochures even for parents to understand what family recovery is. We recently have developed a website for families and providers and child welfare workers to find out their services in the local area and trainings and a place to kind of hold all the information we've been collecting over the years. And we've also done a lot of work on medication-assisted treatment, which is the MAT, Pregnant and Postpartum Work Group, that looks at women who are on methadone or Suboxone and pregnant and deliver and what that means for their involvement in child welfare and how to best support these women and their babies and their families as they go through, which I think is a nice segue into Deborah's work that she's done with Fresh Start, and Fresh Start has also been part of our Family Recovery Council because we've been fortunate to have these two grants in one area to really combine resources to do the community level work to strengthen our partnerships with providers and agencies, as well as providing some unique treatment models to better engage families that are involved in child welfare. So I'm going to turn it over to Deborah now.
Thanks, Kim. So Fresh Start was also funded by the Children's Bureau. Our funding was through the Abandoned Infant Act. And this was a collaboration between the Department of Public Health and the Department of Children and Families, and we subcontracted the services to two community-based agencies. The majority of the contract went to an early education and care agency that has traditionally provided child care in the county and has moved more into providing family services. And we were building on some previous work. We were one of the CAPTA sites. Massachusetts was one of the CAPTA pilot sites, and so one of the things that we learned in trying to serve families with substance-exposed newborns was that having referrals just coming through the child welfare system was not ideal. And so in this new iteration, we changed that and we opened referrals up to come from either self-referral or any community-based agency. So about a third of the referrals came from DCF, a quarter from prenatal clinics, about a fifth from parents themselves. Almost all of the families were involved in the child welfare system. And we served people in pregnancy up through, we took people in who had children under the age of 6 months. So they stayed with us for a longer period of time, but that was the age when they came into us. And we were working with people who were actively using in their pregnancy or at the time of birth, but we did have some cohort of women who had extensive substance use histories, who had extensive histories with the Department of Children and Families, previous termination of parental rights, and were at risk of losing custody of the babies that they were giving birth to, even if they were not currently using. So that was another change with this. And as Kim said, the families, typical of families in the child welfare system, had many, many challenges, both in terms of trauma, mental health, substance use. About 3/4 of the families that had children before had lost permanent custody to some or all of their older children. And then there were a lot of just concrete issues that parents were facing: homelessness. The vast majority of our families had never held jobs. They did not have, had not gotten their GEDs or graduated from high school. So there were a lot of challenges, but what I like to say about them is that what those numbers don't show so much is that we also are working generally with a group of people who are very motivated to be parents. They were not all successful in the end with that, but it was something that they were all coming into the program hoping to be able to parent their children. Can you share? Can you forward this slide? Okay. So this tells you a little bit about our program. Some of the key components. We were primarily a peer staffed program, and I would love to hear more from Iowa later on. But the women who are working in our program were women who were in recovery from substance use disorders themselves, had been through the child welfare system. They had all but one had been incarcerated, and they were essentially connecting people to community-based services. So they were providing some services directly, and they were also acting as a liaison to community-based services. And the reason why I have trauma-informed there at the front is that it was a very big part of the orientation of this program was to both help parents and providers understand the way that their past experiences might be driving their current behaviors. And sometimes that kind of translation was often important, particularly for the child welfare staff who might have trouble understanding why a parent was kind of doing the same thing that they had been doing with each child without being able to make change. And another piece of this was working with early intervention. We worked with 3 local DCF offices and 8 local early intervention programs. Our state's doing really well in terms of getting families referred to these services, but the families were often not following up on those referrals. So part of our work with families was to get them connected to early intervention. Can you forward, Sharon? Actually, no, you want to go back for a sec? So we'll go back for a sec. So we opted for a home visiting model because it eliminated many barriers that the families were facing: transportation, child care, stigma of accessing recovery resources elsewhere, and also because there were a lot of opportunities with home-based services. It was a very good way to build rapport. It was a great way to look at child safety issues, things that sometimes when somebody's coming into an office, a clinician or service provider might not be aware of what's going on in the home. And then it also helped our staff to have a better understanding of the community, the family context in which they were working. One of the things that was we hadn't quite expected initially in our work of staffing this program with peers, what did happen was what we had expected, which was for families, it really increased their engagement, their sense of comfort with the program, feeling like it wasn't somebody who was looking down on them, somebody who had been through the path of addiction, understood them, and also provided inspiration for them. This was somebody who had been incarcerated, who had lost custody of their children, and look where their lives were now. What was a really unanticipated outcome was the power of those staff for other service providers, and particularly for child welfare workers who often see people when they're really in a time of crisis and don't necessarily see them farther down the road when they're in recovery, doing better, more stable in their families. So it was a terrific resource for the child welfare staff to provide them inspiration, and also to have somebody to go to who really had expertise in the area of how do I work with this family? I feel like maybe the parent's using again. Can you come help me have the conversation with the parent? And in terms of engagement, once we lost some people right at the beginning, often due to lack of cell service, depending on how the referral was made. But once people met with the peer staff once, I think it was about 92% of them ended up engaging with the program. So it was a very big draw for them to trust services, and we did make it very clear that this was a program of the Department of Children and Families, but we were somewhat separate from the Department of Children and Families, and we were there to help them with their cases that they had and with their other treatment and family needs. Okay. so I also want to just talk a little bit about substance use and parenting, which is that parenting is a very normalizing role and a huge motivator for parents in terms of stopping their use and maintaining or regaining custody of their children. And most of the parents that we worked with had a lot of skills deficits in the area of parenting. They had, about a third of them had been in foster care themselves as children. Many of them had come from compromised parenting environments. And so that parenting piece really ended up being as important as the recovery piece. And we tried through many different venues to provide them with opportunities where they could experience parenting even if they did not have custody of their children, where they could feel like they were parents and that they were developing competency as parents. One of the ways that we did that was we originally started out that this was going to be a home-based individual family service, and one of the things that we identified early on was that a lot of the parents, especially after they gave birth to their babies, it was a really high-risk situation for child abuse and neglect, because they were parents who had a lot of trauma, didn't want to leave their houses with their babies, were very isolated. We saw a lot of postpartum depression, people who felt unsafe leaving their homes physically, and because there was a lot of drug use and drug dealing right around their homes, and there were babies there who, might be seen once a month by one provider or another. And so we decided early on to provide community-based groups for the families. It was also important because on most family service plans, they're required to have parenting services or parenting groups, but there are very few available in that part of the state. And so we did a whole bunch of different groups, which gave parents the opportunity to come together with other people who were in recovery. And I use that phrase loosely because some people were in recovery for the period of time that they were at the group. All the groups, parents were not allowed to come under the influence, but we did have people really with a pretty big range of recovery time, and that actually proved very helpful to them because people who were really struggling with stopping using got to be with people who had more months and in some cases years of recovery. And for the babies, it was often the only chance that they had to be away from their parents, to experience an early education and care environment. Because this was contracted with an early education and care agency, there was a very high level of sophistication to the child care resources that were being provided. And then another reason for doing the groups was that the child welfare service plan and treatment plans often required parents to be going to, or it was recommended that parents go to 12-step meetings, and we have none in our area that had child care. And many women do not feel comfortable going to NA and AA meetings and didn't have any place to go with their kids. So one of the things that came out from this program that's continuing is an NA meeting with child care that all of the family residential treatment programs use when women leave those programs where they're able to get treatment with their children and they stay in the community. They can continue coming to this NA meeting that provides child care. It's been a tremendous resource in the community. So just to say that the importance of women having the opportunity to come together with other mothers, with their children in groups, was at least as important, if not more important, than that individual work that they were doing with their family support specialist and then with their clinicians in the community. Sharon, you want to move forward? Thank you. So the underlying premise of this project was collaboration, and it was made very clear with families right at the beginning that we were going to be forming a team on their behalf, and that the expectation was that they were going to participate in the team and that their providers were going to participate in the team. So the first thing that happened at the first appointment was getting consent signed, and then contacting all of the providers working with the families, making sure that plans were exchanged. Part of what we saw as our responsibility was helping parents with their, typically with their plans, their service plans that they had from child welfare, to help them access the resources that they needed to complete their plans. Our staff who were high school educated or women or who had GEDs were the ones who convened and led the family team meetings. We had more than 250 team meetings during the course, during probably the last 3 years of this project. And sometimes it was the family support specialist from Fresh Start, the family, and the DCF worker. Sometimes an early intervention worker would be their treatment provider. Sometimes we engaged in a more formal process. We would do a safety mapping process. DCF has adopted signs of safety as part of their new collaborative case practice model. So we would work with a DCF worker around doing safety mapping for the family. Sometimes it was looking at kind of how the family was doing in terms of services that they were accessing, concerns that they had. We were providing a different kind of eye on the family, and we're in there. All families we met with at least once a week. Some we met with every day, depending on the intensity of need for their services. And then we also scheduled appointments jointly. So we would go in sometimes with the DCF worker to the family, and we tried at least on a monthly basis to schedule appointments with early intervention for that substance-exposed newborn or other children in the family involved with early intervention. It allowed the early intervention person to be able to focus a little more on some of the parenting piece while the more practical things were getting dealt with. And then it also allowed the family support specialist to understand what was needed from the early intervention person for the family so that they could help continue that work during the month. One other piece of collaboration that I want to mention is that we did quite a bit of work around non-custodial support, and I want to give a couple examples because there are things that could be done very low cost by other communities. One thing that came to our attention pretty early on was a feeling that parents were often not prepared for their non-custodial visits. And so we basically developed these kind of checklist isn't really the right word, but these resources for families on how to prepare for the visit, what they should bring with them, snack recipes, suggested activities, conversation topics. And we would also give these out to all of the DCF workers in the area offices. And then we also prepared backpacks with developmentally appropriate toys and books for parents to use, because when they didn't have children in their house, they didn't have activities to do with the kids, and often the DCF offices wouldn't have the resources themselves, and so it really eased the way of those visits of the weekly visits for families, and they would check them out, or we would give them to the DCF worker. And then finally, in terms of collaboration, one of the things that we were able to accomplish over time was families who did not have custody of their children were able to participate in our parenting groups and in field trips and those sorts of activities as part of their visitation in collaboration with their DCF workers. So their DCF worker would make a decision, and supervisor would make a decision if this was appropriate for the family, and we would essentially act in a supervisory context. But again, what it did was it gave parents a chance to have a more normalized parenting experience with their kids. Sharon, you want to move ahead? And then Kim talked some about collaboration at the systems level. The Family Recovery Project and Fresh Start worked very, very closely together on much of the work that we did, kind of taking different leads on different parts. The training part was really important in terms of changing the culture in our area. We had 2,712 people in a 4-year span attend trainings that ranged from every conceivable topic related to family recovery. And in all of the trainings that we did, there were certain messages that we tried to have consistently for people coming from all the different disciplines, and those were the importance of child safety, the possibility of recovery, the centrality of parenting to youth and recovery, and the idea that everybody needs help in these areas. You know, it's not like the substance use providers were doing a whole lot better than the child welfare providers, but this was really a new frontier for everybody. And so we tried to do as much joint training as possible, bringing together people from different disciplines to be learning about a topic together, as well as quite a bit of cross-training. So, and Kim mentioned our MAT work that grew out of grew out of Fresh Start's experience with parents in medication-assisted treatment. Sharon, do you want to go ahead? Okay, so these are some of our outcomes. I think one of the most important things really had to do with the fact that we consistently had, and this is anecdotal, but we consistently had when decisions were being made about placement of a baby at birth, because a parent had been working with Fresh Start for some period of time in her pregnancy, we were often told that because the family had the support of this program and had services in-house, the family had a lot of community-based support, that the baby would go home with the mother, even though in another situation, in another circumstance, that decision wouldn't be made. And, we worked very, very closely with the child welfare staff around making sure that there was as good safety as we could have in place for the child and as much support for the parents as we could. And what we saw was that many, many people who had had previous termination of parental rights, who would not likely have had custody of their subsequent babies, did go home with them and did either gain or regain custody over the course of their time with us. And in some cases, there were a few situations in which people lost custody, and those were often situations where that was initiated by us over concerns that a parent was not really in a place at that time in their lives to be able to parent safely. And the last slide, Sharon. Next slide. Okay. Oh. So we did find, in terms of the second bullet, we did find that a lot of advocacy needed to happen. And advocacy can be an uncomfortable word for some people. But there were families, they're complicated systems to navigate, and the issue of child protection can often feel like it's at odds with parental recovery, and so we did do a lot of advocacy work, and we're very explicit that that's what we were doing. We also tried as much as possible to destigmatize the issue, to let it, to have it be clear how common this is in families, and that it does not mean that people can't, without the proper supports, be very fine parents, but again, supports are needed. What happened with the funding, this was a demonstration project, a primarily federally funded demonstration project. Parts of the project have been picked up through third-party billing. Our state Medicaid system has managed care for behavioral health, and there's a community support program, and some of these services are now being provided through the community support program to pregnant women with substance use disorders, parents with substance use disorders, and people who are at high risk of relapse. We're trying to broaden it to say it's not just whether or not people have stopped using, but recognizing that having children, losing custody, if that happens when people give birth, or very high periods of potential for relapse. So I think that's it, and we can open it up for questions and for input from other states.
Yes, for those of you who are on mute, you could do *6 so that you can come back on. And let's start off to see if anybody have any questions for Brian, Deborah, or for Kim, or any comments about anything that they have shared with us today. Okay. And if, hello? Anyone want to share what they're doing in their states? I mean, I think, first of all, I want to thank Brian, Deborah, and Kim for sharing that information with us. You are doing some very great work there in that.
Yes.
Hello? I think that's you, the echo. So, goes around here. Let me readjust this. So, Guy, you want to share what's going on in Michigan right now?
Well, we kind of talked a little bit about that earlier some of those things that we were doing. There's not much that we're doing separately in terms of the issue of substance-affected families. I know that through the Department of Community Health, they are, we've been working with them. We've been doing a lot more in terms of interagency collaboration, and we've been doing more work with them around more of a recovery-oriented system of care in terms of how people come into the substance abuse treatment system, and kind of working more collaboratively where that's concerned. And certainly in-home services has come into that. So I was very happy to see in today's presentation the idea of the in-home services and the approach that they're taking with families. I think another thing that was really very helpful was to see that the importance of, while we're talking about the treatment programs and the more traditional treatment programs, that the whole idea of recovery support and the kinds of things that families really need, because that's something, of course, that we've done with family preservation for a very long time, but it hasn't always been as easy a transition when we work with families, and of course there are many in Michigan that we've worked with that were substance affected and had child welfare issues at the same time. So that's been something that we've had to finesse over the years. I think for me, one of the things that was most important was the hearing about, and I have to, I may not be saying it right, but the Recovery Council. I guess I would want to hear more about how you formed this and who was chosen to be a part of that, and how that was funded, if at all. It was funded separately.
The Family Recovery Council was actually, we did use that. That was funded through the Regional Partnership Grants Program, so we did use some of our grant funding to support the activities like the cross-training. And initially, we had a hard time getting providers there, so we did offer some stipends for them to attend. But I think now that they've been meeting in terms of sustainability, I think that this group will continue to meet because of the benefits they got out of it. So I think it was more initially getting people to the table and having the stipends and having some very low-cost cross-training. And we set up like recovery fair, provider fairs in the DCF child welfare offices where providers would come and do some just talking about their services and get to know some of the DCF staff. And then DCF staff would come to providers' organizations and, you know, talk about mandated reporting and other things like that. So a lot of the stuff we did through the Recovery Council was of no cost, but it was helpful to have something. And we do have a half-time staff person, which I think is really key to, you know, sending out the emails, getting people together. I mean, that's her sole focus is the cross-systems work. So I think without that staff person, it's a challenge.
Yeah. No, I was very impressed with that, because I remember as a very young worker having, at that time, access to a multidisciplinary team, and it reminded me of that kind of had some additional things that they were doing that the multidisciplinary team did not necessarily do. But having that is such an important piece, because it's so easy to lose focus of some of the different issues that you need to really be aware of when you're maybe in the child welfare vein and you're not thinking in terms of the substance abuse or mental health or some of the other issues that need to come into play. So I just find that really helpful, and I think that's something that I'm going to really think about.
Well, great. I'm happy to send you information. We are making an electronic form of a best practice guidance that we put together, and the website, I can make sure you guys, that's just kind of something we're launching now, but when that's more solidified, I can get that out to people to kind of see how we took that information and put it on our website.
Great.
If you could send that to me, the information, so we can get it out to the rest of the group who may not have been on the call today as well. That would be helpful.
Okay.
Great. Carolyn, regular, you want to share what's going on in Iowa?
Sure. Well, in Iowa, we have a similar program. It's called the Parent Partner Program. And I think this is what was alluded to earlier from Iowa. But we actually had, for that program, we had actually utilized PSSF time-limited reunification funds for that, and the Parent Partner Program is where a parent who has been through the system had their children removed and have since reunified with their child and are post-reunification at least a year, are really doing that peer mentoring of parents who are now in that situation themselves where they've had a child removed and they're working with the child welfare system to be reunified with their children. And so we're now, starting with this state fiscal year, we've been working with the Midwest Implementation Center to spread the parent-partner practice across the state, and some preliminary data is really showing some really good results, but we won't have anything until sometime after September 30th as far as an actual report. But starting with the state fiscal year, we're actually utilizing other funding other than PSSF, and we've started a statewide contract. So we're not totally statewide yet with the Parent Partner Program, but we're working towards that and certainly hope with state fiscal year 2015 to be further along utilizing the peer-to-peer mentoring Parent Partner Program across the state. Specific to family support, PSSF family support, we utilize that in Iowa through the Iowa Child Abuse Prevention Program. And this is where we actually issue contracts with individual child abuse prevention councils and communities. And some of the services, they can have parent development, which is primarily what we utilize the PSSF funding for. And a lot of that, several of those programs are in-home, home visiting, parent education programs. Some of them are group parent education programs where you get together as a group with the parents. And then there's also outreach and community services and sexual abuse prevention and some like community development. So in Iowa, that's how we're utilizing the family support funds.
Thank you, Carolyn. Appreciate that. How about Mississippi? Carolyn Bland, you want to share a little bit about Mississippi? Don't know if she's there. Okay. Johanna, are you still on? We lose you. I lost her. Time to okay. Are there any other questions or comments? Anything else anyone might want to share? Because I think that we might have lost the other. No? Well, I want to thank you all for being on the call today. I know that August is a slow month for everyone. It's summer. So I appreciate you taking the time out, and I especially want to thank Massachusetts, Brian, Kim, and Deborah for taking on this task to do the presentation today. The check is in the mail now.
Thanks, Sharon. Hopefully it's enough to cover the split with us.
I forgot. I shouldn't say that because you hold me to that. But I really appreciate it because I really, when we saw the information that we on the program, we felt this would be good to find more, to hear more about what's going on in regards to so the recovery program, the Fresh Start program. So I appreciate that very, very much. And thank you, Guy, and Carolyn for stepping in to share what it is that you all are doing in your state as well. Having said that, if there aren't any other questions, comments? Okay. Well, you all have a wonderful day and a wonderful rest of the summer.
You too, Sharon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. The host has left the meeting. So at this time, the meeting will come to an end. Thank you and goodbye.